Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the candidate of the Green Party and the Socialist Party for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and organize for the eco-socialist program that Angela Walker and I ran on. And today we have Ilya Budraitskis, who's a Russian author and socialist activist, anti-war activist. And you know, one of the things I've tried to do on this podcast is amplify the voices of the left in the post-Soviet societies. We've had Ukrainians on. Ilya is our first Russian, and I'm so happy he could come on. He's a historian and political activist from Moscow, but he had to leave right after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine last year when the political repression came down. He's currently a visiting scholar at the program in critical theory at UC Berkeley. He's a co-founder of the online publication Posley. Maybe I pronounced that wrong. Posley means after in English, and it's a left-wing anti-war Russian publication. And Ilya's been active as well as a scholar and academic for more than 2 decades. He was active, like many of us were, in the anti-globalization or global justice movement in the late 1990s and early 2000s. He was a co-founder of the Russian Socialist movement in 2011, which was very active in labor, environmental, and abortion rights campaigns, and some election campaigns for left-wing candidates. Although, given recent developments, that kind of public activity has been suppressed during the war. He's the author of a book, and we'll put the link to this, Dissidents Among Dissidents, which is a book about the left in post-Soviet Russia. And so we'll put links to all those things. Last thing I'll mention about Ilya is he's part of a speaking tour that the Ukraine Solidarity Network has organized, and he'll be speaking with Ukrainian socialists in Chicago and New York and the San Francisco Bay Area. And we'll put the dates for that and the links to where the information is. So Ilya, thanks again for coming on. You've written a lot about the nature of the Russian state and how it's developed under Putin. And, so what should people know about what's been going on in Russia in the last couple of decades?
So first of all, thank you for having me here and for this opportunity to speak to American audience. So coming to your question, it's important to say that the current regime, Putin's regime, already existed for more than 20 years. And it means that it is the regime that was established on the foundation of the radical market capitalist transformation of the post-Soviet Russian society. It's a regime that directly linked with the previous decade, with the Russian 90s, with all the results of the so-called market reforms and the deep changes in the Russian society, and also it based on the very undemocratic nature of the post-Soviet Russian political regime established by Boris Yeltsin, who lately appointed Putin to be the next leader of the country. So this regime is the capitalist regime, is the regime based on the neoliberal rationality, on the neoliberal ground. And during this last 2 decades, this regime, Putin's regime, developed in a more and more authoritarian direction. However, you can say that if in, let's say, 2000s, in the first decade of its existence, this regime was mostly apolitical, So it provides such a message for the population, for the Russian society, that the political participation, any struggle for civic or political or social rights are not important, because the only thing that is important is the economic growth, individual wealth that could be increased during the rise of the oil prices, which became the main source of the Russian prosperity in the 2000s. But then in 2011, 2012, Putin's regime was confronted by a huge protest movement, huge politicization of some significant part of the Russian society, and from that moment it started to move in a more much more authoritarian and much more, let's say, ideologically grounded direction. So even in 2012, when Putin came back to the presidency for his third president term, he blamed the opposition, the protest movement, to be traitors, to be a kind of force that has no legitimate place in the Russian society, and that are just paid agents of the West, let's say. So in the same time, he started to portray himself as the conservative leader, as the father of the nation, as the person who provide so-called traditional values in the Russian society, and then in 2014, with the start of the Russian military involvement in Ukraine, with the annexation of Crimea, he also started to build some kind of rally around the flag politics in Russia, where basically if you oppose this imperialist military claims of the Russian state, you automatically became an enemy of Russia. You automatically should be alienated from some kind of entire healthy body of the Russian nation. And from this point, you can say that the military involvement in Ukraine, starting from 2014, was not only about the foreign policy, was not only about the imperial ambitions of the Russian state in the, let's say, post-Soviet space, but it was also directly linked with the internal situation in the country, with the Putin's focus on keeping his power, keeping his deeply personalized political regime. And then, of course, with the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in the February of the last year, you can see another step in the transformation of the Russian regime into the open type of dictatorship, where any different points of view, any sort of the self-organization in the society are not allowed. So for now, we see in Russia how this regime, which was started from some kind of authoritarian neoliberal soft management of the society, of the country, came to a very extreme far right or even fascist dictatorship.
So, what do you think motivated Putin to invade Ukraine? That we hear a lot of talk about NATO provoked him, and then there's economic reasons. But people like you and others have said it's also ideological. That there's a imperial ambition and mentality there. So talk about that. How did this invasion get started? From why did people go in?
So I think it's very important and very dangerous idea that Putin was provoked, because actually, if you came back to his speech in the very beginning of this invasion, that was exactly what he was saying, that it was not my choice, but Russia was provoked. We had no other thing to do than to start the aggression against our neighboring country. And this idea is very important because it's somehow helped him to, and the current Russian state and him personally, to avoid any responsibility for his actions. And when you hear this type of the argument, even from some Americans, from the left-wing Americans or extreme conservative Americans, you see that they basically support this idea of the lack of agency of Russia. Yes, so if you're explaining this invasion only in terms that something or NATO or US government provoked Russia to make it, you skip this agency. You deny the very agency of Russia as a great power, as the country with the huge military budget, a country which is a nuclear power, one of the main nuclear powers in the world. And in this sense, you can say that this aggression was planned from the side of Russia. This aggression is a pure example of how any aggressive action against other country would be justified from the side of the aggressor. Because if you remember the Second World War, the main point of Hitler was also that he was provoked. It was not his will to start the war. The war was started by some Anglo-Saxon Soviet plutocracy, and Germany had no other choice than to answer, than to respond. Basically, the same kind of explanation you have behind the Putin's action. So definitely, in the moment when the invasion was started, there was no any direct military threat from the side of Ukraine towards Russia. You can say that there were even any preparations to start the military operation of Ukrainian country in the east, in the Donbas region. There was no any evidences of the any sort of the preparations like this. And even if you see the initial plan of Putin in the very beginning of this invasion, you can see how it is different from the point of view that Ukrainian was a kind of immediate threat for Russia, because this initial plan was to take over the Kiev, to take control over the whole country, to start invasion from the north of the country, where there was no any significant concentration of Ukrainian troops. So basically, you see that it was not provoked in the terms that otherwise Ukraine can start any military action against Russia. If you look at the goals of this invasion, you can see that definitely these goals are much more ambitious than just to take over the control of the east of the country, and even in the south of the country. The initial goal was to take control over the whole country, to change its government, to install some kind of puppet regime in Kiev, and that plan was definitely based on some kind of ideological imagination. This ideological imagination very much presented in the current Russian propaganda, not just after the start of the invasion, but let's say during the last 9 years. The main point of this propaganda is that Ukraine is the artificial state, that historically it is just a part of Great Russia. There is no such true, let's say, identity as the Ukrainian. And in this sense, the very idea of independent Ukrainian state is a wrong idea. It's a fake idea, which was discovered by the enemies of Russia from the West. In this sense, you can say that behind this view on Ukraine, this extreme imperialist view on Ukraine, you can see some much broader concept that Putin is trying to provide internationally. The concept of the multipolar world. Yeah, the very term of the multipolar world is very much used by current Russian state. So what is the multipolar world? It's a world where the only few great powers, or as it defined in some of the Russian official documents, the state civilizations like United States, like China, or like Russia, are the true sovereign countries who are able to make any decisions, who are and who have a historical right to divide the world into the spheres of their influence. From this point of view, is not only Ukraine is artificial state, but also Poland is artificial state, Baltic states are artificial, Finland is artificial, Caucasian republics are artificial, and so on, and so forth. So basically, you have, according to this view, you have just a very small number of the true independent countries, of the true great powers that should divide the world. And that is the point of view that Putin was trying to provide And that's why, from his point of view, this war is not only about Ukraine. It's not only about the Russian right, historical right for the territories of Ukraine. Is about the right of Russia to play its role as the full state civilization. And of course, it's about the much broader Russian imperialist ambitions in the post-Soviet region, or even in the Eastern Europe.
Yeah, that multipolar vision, as Putin puts it out there, sounds like multi-imperialism, and it's not. It's presented by people in this country that are, in the Russian camp on the Ukraine war as weakening Western imperialism so other societies can develop. But I think the way you define it is, the reality that, Putin wants he wants his sphere of influence in Eurasia. And, that's sort of natural from his point of view. And that's not a vision that's leading us to a better place. So how do you think this war can come to an end? What will it take, in Russia, from Ukraine, the world community? Where are we at? Can this war even end while Putin is still in power?
So the first thing that even up to now, the goal of Russia in this war is still very unclear. You can find many versions of this goal coming from the different Russian officials in the different moments. So some of them are saying, like recently, Putin's spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, that the goal of Russia is just to keep a part of southern and eastern Ukraine, which was already considered as a part of Russian Federation according to the last constitution amendments that were made a year ago. But if you look at the declarations of Putin himself, at the declarations of Russian propaganda, you can easily find the idea that Russia, at least, wants to control the whole Ukraine, to, let's say, demilitarize Ukraine and introduce kind of the new puppet government. Also, you have the idea that NATO should came back to the borders of 1997, and that was actually mentioned in the Russian demands, which were introduced just before the start of the invasion. So they were not about Ukraine, but they were generally about the presence of NATO in the Eastern Europe. Also, you have the idea of the Russian influence in the post-Soviet space in general, which means that after Ukraine, Russia can go to Moldova or can go to Georgia, and so on and so forth. So you can say that there are something very precise that Putin's Russia wants to be the the end of this war, and that's the main problem of Putin's state and of his imperial policy, that he's ready to take whatever is possible to take in the moment. If it will be possible to take just a part of Ukraine, okay, maybe it will be enough just for some short period of time. If it will be possible to get something more, he will definitely go for it. So in this sense, I think that only some sort of the, let's say, military defeat, maybe not on the huge scale, yeah, but in even some local but kind of significant military defeat can limit the appetites of current Russian regime.
So you were involved inside the country and now from outside on the left and with anti-war and anti-fascist movements in Russia. And a lot of these people are now in prison or on trial. Could you talk about the situation of political prisoners in Russia and what we can do to help these people?
So you have to know that from the very beginning of this invasion, the number of new laws, extremely repressive laws, were introduced in the country, and according to these laws, any sort of anti-war criticism is totally criminalized. So it means that even your comment in the social media could lead you to a prison term of 5 or even 7 years. And already there are hundreds of cases like this, cases of very different people. Some of these people, they already were political activists from the left or from the liberal opposition. Some of these people, they're just ordinary people who express their feelings, their true feelings about this war. But definitely, for now, you can say that the level of repressions in Russia much higher than it was, let's say, under Brezhnev in the late Soviet Union. So we have now much more political prisoners, and the conditions of these political prisoners are much more hard than it was, some 40, 50 years ago. Probably you know that just a couple of weeks ago, one of the prominent Russian left-wing intellectuals, Boris Kagarlitsky, was arrested, and he's facing the prison term up to 7 years. And he's not very young. He's 64 years old. So even for the people with such international visibility, let's say, it is extremely risky to stay in Russia and to have a clear anti-war position as Boris Kagarlitsky had from the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So for the people who are not so well known, let's say in the West, they're of course not so much chances to be supported, to get international solidarity and so on. So in our media project, Posle Media, that you already introduced, we are covering such information about the left-wing activists, labor activists who were arrested during this year and last year. And of course, the most important way to help them is just to help to distributing the information. about these people, because I don't believe that any, let's say, letters of solidarity from the West could help these people and could make pressure on the Russian authorities for the moment.
So for the people that are still in Russia and want to resist the war and, the Putin right-wing government, have they just had to organize underground at this point? Is there any possibility of public activity?
Indeed, it's very hard to be organized in Russia in the current moment. But of course, there are still activists. There are people from the younger generation of the Russian left movement who are still in the country and who are trying to make some propaganda or just to keep their own groups, to influence people around them, but it's a type of clandestine work. It's like it was under the most repressive dictatorships in the past century. So in this sense, it's very hard to compare the current Russian anti-war movement with the anti-war movements, I don't know, in US during the Vietnam War, with all the pressure against the anti-war movement in US in that times. But of course, the conditions are absolutely uncomparable. So, for example, if you just mention that Russian army committed some war crimes in Ukraine, it's already a crime according to the Russian law, and you can go to prison for this. Even if you say publicly that what Russia is doing in Ukraine is a full-scale war, you also could go to prison for it, because officially in the official Russian, let's say, Orwellian language, it is not a war, but it's a special military operation. So you should call it special military operation. Yeah, if you call it a full-scale war, it means that you are distributing the fake news about the special military operation, and it's a crime. So the conditions are extremely tough for the moment.
What's your sense of popular sentiment about the war? I know publicly people can't speak out. There have been surveys or polls, but people receiving a phone call may be afraid to say what they really think. But what's your sense of are parts of the society becoming tired of the war? A lot of people, Russians have been killed and coming back home. What's your sense of where the general population is at?
Of course, there were not so much militarist and pro-war feelings even in the very beginning of the invasion, and there are much less for now. But the main problem of the Russian society is not that it is very much pro-war, but that it is living in the atmosphere of fear, and the lack of any self-organization, the fear of any type of politics, of political action, is very much rooted in this society. And it happened a long time ago, before this war was started. I think that is the result of the, let's say, neoliberal reforms and the neoliberal condition of the Russian society, which became extremely atomized, extremely apolitical, and extremely individualist. And for now, there is a big debate in the Russian opposition circles about the relevance of any opinion polls in this situation. There are still a few independent groups that are trying to make some kind of service, but the main problem of this service that it can catch only a minority of the people, because majority immediately refuse to answer for to any opinion polls. So the data that you have from this opinion polls represent a very small part of the of the Russian population. But even according to these opinion polls, you can say that there are some from 20 to 30% of Russians who are not afraid to answer, to express their opinion, who are critical about the war. Then there are also some 20-30% of the people who are extremely influenced by the propaganda and who are very pro-war. And it's important to say that most of these people, they're old people. They're people from the old generation. So you can see clearly that there is a huge generational gap in this character of pro-war sentiments in the Russian society. So then between these two groups, you have some, let's say, half of the population which are purely conformist, which are ready to say that yes, we support the war, but in the same time they are not so committed to this idea, and they are much more concerned about their personal conditions, their personal life, than some kind of big ambitions of the Putin state.
You know, when people theorize about imperialism in the world today, some people talk about the relationship between Russia and the United States, or between imperialist and sub-imperialist powers, as one of antagonistic cooperation. I think of them as frenemies. In some respects, they're in competition and in conflict, but in many respects, they are cooperating in the multilateral management of global capitalism through the IMF and the World Bank and the United Nations framework on climate change, where, for example, Russia and the United States have held back mandatory cuts in carbon emissions. They've blocked together on that. And there were times when Russia was providing bases for NATO to go into Afghanistan and supply its intervention there. So you were a co-author with, I don't know, maybe a dozen Ukrainian, Russian, Polish, and German leftists in a paper called Support Ukrainian Resistance and Disempower Fossil Capital, which, you know, warned that, you know, there may be interests, particularly the fossil fuel interests, that want this war to end so they can get back to business as usual, exploiting the fossil capital and imposing a deal on Ukraine so that both Russia and the West can exploit the resources and the labor. And so, you know, could you talk about that? Because there was a time when, you know, the US was intervening in elections, like Yeltsin's reelection. And, you know, Yeltsin appointed Putin. So, you know, talk about that. You know, where are we at in terms of the current conflict and where it might go? Because, like around fossil capital, there are common interests in both the Russian fossil interests and the Western fossil interests?
So first of all, you're absolutely right when you mention this era of great cooperation between the Yeltsins or even Putin's regime with US imperialism. I just want to remind that in the very beginning of his power, Putin was a big friend with George W. Bush. He totally supported the narrative of the war against terrorism. And even he was trying to sell his own repressive, bloody operation in Chechnya in the early 2000s as the part of the global crusade against Islamic terrorism. So that was a moment when Putin and his clique were trying to be integrated in this, let's say, club of the global elites, of the club of the global powers. But then something happened. It's a big question and a big story. What exactly was happened? There are many reasons for this. Somehow it became clear that there is no such a place in this global club of the great powers that Putin was expected in the beginning. Another reason for this kind of problems in their relations with US, of course, was the experience of the Arab Spring, the Ukrainian protests in 2014, and Russian protests of 2011-2012, because somehow all these events provide, let's say, were received by Putin as the result of the American plot, of the American conspiracy, and it is something that is deeply related to his point of view, which is extremely and fundamentally anti-revolutionary point of view, that there is no such agency as the people. That all revolutions, all revolts that ever happened in history were organized by some real force which was under the curtain. So, for example, he pointed out many times that even the Russian Revolution of 1917 also was the plot of Germany, Britain, and so on. So, coming to the question of the fossil fuels, yes, definitely the Putin's regime was from the beginning deeply rooted in the transferring of the Russian sources, in the power of the huge Russian corporations, state-owned or state-controlled corporations like Rosneft, the main oil corporation, or Gazprom, the gas corporation, and Putin many times explained that the climate change agenda for him is also a kind of not even conspiracy, but the way to cover the real competition between the different countries and market players. So basically, he denied it as the part of the global agenda. Is a key issue of the global agenda and the global responsibility. So also you can say that with this whole framework of the multipolar world, the clash of civilizations, another concept which was borrowed by Putin's Russia from American conservative Samuel Huntington. So in all this framework, there is no place for any, let's say, global responsibility, for any thing like interest of humanity as such. There is no any universal tasks and no any universal values in the fundamental view of this regime, and of course it is extremely dangerous.
So I see some questions are starting to come into the chat. Maybe we could go with those. They'll come up on the screen here. Okay, here we go. We Need Critical Thinking asks, what does Ilya, see will be the future of industrial exports from Russia?
I don't fully understand this question, but of course it very much depends on the development of the current events. But for now, we see that the current model of the Russian state is a kind of strong, is a kind of sustainable in the global situation, because for now Russia is starting to discover the new markets, mostly in the countries like China, India, Iran, or Latin America, and in this way, there is some future for the Russian import and Russian export.
Yeah, I think that there was some reporting in New York Times, Washington Post, or Wall Street Journal this week about how, on Russia's economy, and while the oil and gas exports, have been the basis for the economy, the industrial exports are declining because, in part, they can't get the parts to, manufacture, and then there's the sanctions. So I think that's where that question comes from. But there was another question up. Same guy, we need critical thinking. What does Ilya see in the future of the ruble? Will the world have a legit multi-currency or an alternative currency to the dollar? Is, like some of the BRICS have talked about that. So yeah. Well, that's a thesis that's contestable, but BRICS is going to meet soon. So, what's your take on that, Ilya?
Definitely now you have serious problems with Russian currency, but the main tendency that Russia is trying to switch from dollar to Chinese or Indian currencies in the trade of especially of the natural resources. So you can say that in this way the sanctions can really influence Russian economy in order to paralyze it or to stop it to function or provoke the full economic crisis in Russia. And I think even when we start to talk about sanctions, we have to understand that all the sanctions in, let's say, not only in case of or other countries which were focused on the population of the country as a whole, could not provide the political changes. So the aim of the true aim of the sanctions against Russia should be to stop the war, to stop the aggression, and to stop it. Of course, you should influence the Russian elite, but not the Russian population as a whole. And if we look at the sanctions against the big Russian capital, we see that still with this huge number of the sanctions, and there are more than 1,000 types of sanctions against Russia, only a minority of the big Russian capital is under the sanctions. And that happened because the sanctions couldn't touch the various types of money laundering that existed in the global market, and where Russia was fully integrated during the last 20 years. So in this sense, you can say that the result of this 20 years of the Putin's regime was the full integration in the structures of the global capitalism. And the Russian ruling class, the Russian ruling elite, is very much experienced about how this world is really working.
You know, that question makes me want to bring on to the podcast in the future a radical political economist from South Africa named Patrick Bond, who's written a lot about the BRICS. And his analysis is they are sub-imperial powers that have so far integrated into Western-led imperialism through the financial institutions, including participating in the money laundering of exporting ill-gotten gains out of countries like Russia. I mentioned the UN framework on climate change. Those sponsor those conferences of the parties, or COP conferences annually. And then the BRICS Development Bank to date has really imposed neoliberal conditions on its loans, and they're small compared to the IMF. And all these countries, like China and Russia, particularly China, have a lot of weight in the IMF. And, you know, if you read Patrick Bond's studies, and he provides the data and the policy reports, they have, you know, so far strived to integrate into the Western-led imperialist economy. And then there are contradictions within the BRICS. China and India do not get along. They're in conflict. So that BRICS conference is coming up, and maybe we'll get Patrick Bond to come in and talk about, you know, what came out of that in the future.
I want to add to this. I also read some of Patrick Bond's articles about BRICS, and what I discovered there was that basically you have different views and different strategies what BRICS should be from the point of view of Russia, or a point of view of China, or let's say Brazil. Because the Chinese approach until recently was exactly like what you explained. It was about how to build a kind of mirror of the neoliberal financial system, which could be some kind of parallel, not a real alternative, but a parallel to the Western financial system. So for them, BRICS is mostly about economy. It's not about some type of politically military alliance. And for Russia, is exactly the politically military alliance is what Putin is really interested in BRICS. And I think in this sense, you can see how some hidden disagreements could arise even between the BRICS countries. Because, for example, during the last year, you had a lot of nearly open declarations coming from the Russian officials that Russian nuclear weapons could be used, and like 2 months ago, for example, the leading Russian Putinist foreign affairs strategist, he wrote a very scaring article about it, where basically he said that there is no such a thing as the universal global fear about the nuclear war. So nuclear war could be a tool in the conflict of the national interests between different great powers. And in this sense, Russia could and maybe has to use its nuclear weapons in order to defend its existence, its national interest, and so on. And there were a lot of moments during last year when such even BRICS countries as India or South Africa, they warned Russia to stop this kind of rhetorics, because it's already creates some kind of risks for the BRICS countries as well. Also, you have this question of the grain deal, which was brought by Russia recently, and that was definitely not in the interest of the most of the BRICS countries. So, in this sense, you can say that Russia and its politics is the integral part of some general political and military line of BRICS, because BRICS is not a political military alliance.
Frankie Lee asks, Howie and Ilya are dragging out the conflict, and the sanctions is going to hurt the dollar more than the ruble. You want to comment on that, Ilya?
I don't fully understand the question. I know that there was the huge fall of the ruble during last 2 weeks. So for now, Russia, let's say, yeah. So anyway, you can say that ruble was not really hurt because of the sanctions, but also you can say that it's not just a problem of the sanctions, the current fall of the ruble, but it's also the result of all the consequences of the war for the Russian economy. The extreme growth of the Russian military budget and military expenses, the huge number of people who are living or already left the country. So more than half of million of Russians left the country because of the war. So you can say that it happened only because of the sanctions. Just to give you some data, in the spring of the last year, the ruble, so the course was like 60 rubles to $1, and now it's about 100 rubles for $1. So you have a huge fall of the ruble, not just because of the sanctions, but because of the war and the whole consequences that it produced.
Yeah, I'll speak to the dragging out the conflict point. I don't know what you expect Ukraine to do, surrender and let Russia rule them? When they resist, I mean, asking them to surrender is like asking the Red Army in the Soviet Union to surrender to the Germans and saying the Red Army was extending the war because they fought back against the invasion of their country. Same thing with the Allies on the Western Front. So it just doesn't make any sense how any progressive could accept Russian imperialist domination of a neighboring country.
I simply, Sergio, I simply don't buy in this kind of rhetorical figure of dragging the conflict, because you can say the same for Russia. So why Russia is doing this? So it's a very simple way to end this conflict tomorrow. Just for Russia to leave the occupied Ukrainian territories, and the conflict will be all over.
Well, I think that's a good point to. Oh, wait, we got another question. Let's go via email. Outside of the war, what is the present state of the Russian left, and what are the major issues?
So the current state, the present state of the Russian left, as I already explained, is that it's not possible in Russia to, act publicly, to act in a way of public politics. Yeah, it's not just a question of the war, but it's a question of the character of the Russian regime, and especially the character of this regime after the start of the invasion. So you, as the activist, as a left activist, as the labor activist, you face a danger from the state. You face the danger of repressions in any type of activity. So, for example, last year, one of the leaders of the strike of the delivery workers in Russia was arrested, and he spent in jail about a year. So we also, just yesterday, there were a number of arrests in the various cities of the country. The people who were involved in the network of the electoral observers, because we will have the presidential elections soon. In the spring of 2024, and there were still some people in Russia who were trying to organize independent observation of the elections. So now these people are arrested, not because of the war, but because their activity is not allowed. So any independent activity that is not controlled by Kremlin, by the government is not allowed. So that is the situation.
Okay, well, we've gone an hour. Let's get in the chat the schedule of the speaking tour, because Ilya will be speaking in Chicago and then in New York City as part of a speaking tour with Ukrainian socialists who are in solidarity with each other, and the Ukraine Solidarity Network is trying to amplify their voices in this country, where mostly what we hear are the Kremlin narrative and the NATO narrative. And we don't hear from the actual people, particularly our political comrades in the left in Ukraine and Russia. So I hope that's going in the chat. I'm not sure I'm in the right place. Okay, here we nope. Is it coming up on the chat? Yeah, I can't put it in directly in the chat from here, I don't think. Well, in any case, let me see if, well, the thing to do is, if you can't see it in the chat, which has the details, you can go to the link tree of the Ukraine Solidarity Network, which is https://linktree, that's linktr.ee/Ukraine Solidarity Network. But Ilya will be in Chicago on September 3rd. That's a Sunday, speaking at the Socialism 2023 conference, together with Hannah Parakota, who is actually going to be on our podcast next week. And then Dennis Bondar, who's been on our podcast before. They're Ukrainian socialists. And then they'll be speaking again at Loyola University on Tuesday, September 5th. And then they come to New York City, and they'll be speaking in Brooklyn on Thursday, September 7th. It was going to be at Brooklyn College. That got canceled. I just found that out. I don't know why, but we'll find another place. And then on Saturday, September 9th, at the LGBT Community Center in Manhattan. And the tour continues. Ilya won't be on this one. Another Ilya Matveev, will be speaking with Hannah Parakota at UC Berkeley on Wednesday, September 13th. So, look for the information on that. I may have screwed up my chat somehow, because the last thing I got in there is at 3:41. But hopefully that got in the chat. And let's see. Here we go. Yeah, it got in. I don't know what I did. I'm kind of technologically behind. I don't always know what's going on these platforms. So anyway, thanks again, Ilya. I think you covered a lot of points people have not heard if they've just been listening to the pro-Kremlin ecosystem of websites and blogs and podcasts, or the mainstream media explanation. We don't hear from the people who've been progressive on the left and struggles in Russia and Ukraine. So thanks for being here for that, and I hope people will follow up. We should have online availability of those talks. I know not everybody's in Chicago, New York, or the Bay Area. And then next week we'll have Hannah Parakota, who's a member of Socialist Group, the Ukrainian Socialist Organization, and she's working out of Switzerland at this time. And she's she's been on Democracy Now! She's definitely worth hearing. So I hope you'll come back next week. And so once again, Ilya, thank you very much, and everybody have a good week.
Thank you. Bye.